So we hope through this lecture, we will get a lot of input and insight and new insight from Prof Ganesh Ramachandran so that we can give the best for our students and not disappointing the parents who have entrusted their children to us. And once again, I would like to, on behalf of our Civitas Academic and our students, we would like to say thank you very much for coming today, Professor Ramachandran. Hopefully the knowledge you provide for us today will be a blessing to the community. And maybe we can play the video, perhaps bisa mungkin diputarkan videonya untuk sedikit memperkenalkan kepada Prof kondisi kita. I would like to play some video, a profile video of our School of Medicine to you. It's only about 3 minutes before I close this introduction. Is it okay, Professor?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Tolong diputar videonya. I also like to say hello and welcome to the Dean of MAHSA University, Prof Rusli. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sorry I didn't welcome you early. I'm so sorry, but thank you for coming. Thank you for joining our session for today.
Thank you, Dr. Shatira. It's okay.
I'm really sorry, Professor.
I just joined. It's okay. Prof Ganesh is still our, immediate past dean. So thank you.
Oh yes, thank you, Prof Rusli, for communicate and for making us possible to have this this lecture. It's all because of you. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So a little for information, today's participants comprise of our lecturer and also our students. There are already some of them who in the clinical stage. And then some of them are also still in the academic phase, but they are all eager to learn from Professor Ganesh, and it's a very interesting topic for today. And maybe for the future, there's also some of not only talking about educational, maybe some about future medicines or new insight in lecture that we can make an online lecture, because this media provide us and make us able to close the distance between countries. Maybe there's a little bit trouble in the uploading the video. So maybe for time efficiency, we can skip the video first, and maybe if it is possible, we can go to Prof Ganesh lecture. Hamra, bagaimana? Bisa langsung?
Iya dok, baik dok.
Ya, silakan.
Terima kasih banyak untuk sambutan yang diberikan oleh Dekan Fakultas Kedokteran dan Ilmu Kesehatan, Dokter Syatira. Dan untuk melanjutkan acara kuliah umum kita pada pagi hari ini beserta diskusi, akan saya serahkan kepada moderator kita pada hari ini. Beliau merupakan salah satu dosen di program studi pendidikan dokter. Beliau adalah Dokter Andi Faradillah, spesialis gizi klinik. Kepada Dokter Andi Faradillah, dengan hormat saya persilahkan.
Terima kasih MC, terima kasih Hamra. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Do you hear my voice clear?
Yes, clear, very clear.
Okay. Today I will be the moderator, and of course we are pleased and honored to have our distinguished guest lecturer today, Prof Ganesh Ramachandran. Before I invite him to give his talk, allow me to introduce Prof Ganesh first. So he finished his medical doctor in MAHSA University, then he continued taking specialists in obstetric and gynecology in London. Last but not least, he applied medical and health science education in University of Hong Kong. Currently, Prof Ganesh, while being as a clinician, he also continues to give his contribution in medical and health education. Well, without a further delay, I invite Prof Ganesh to give your talk. Please, the time is about 30 minutes, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Prof, it's clear.
Yes, thank you very much. Selamat pagi kepada semua rakan perjuangan daripada Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar. Saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Dekan Fakultas Kedokteran dan Ilmu Kesehatan di atas jemputan menyampaikan kuliah umum pada pagi ini. Dan juga saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Dekan Fakulti Perubatan, Kejururawatan dan Biosains MAHSA University, Profesor Rosli Nordin, yang telah memberi kebenaran kepada saya untuk menyampaikan kuliah ini. Sebelum saya bermula, saya ingin meminta kebenaran untuk menyampaikan kuliah ini di dalam bahasa Inggeris. Dan selepas ini saya sedia untuk menjawab sebarang soalan dalam bahasa Inggeris dan juga bahasa Malaysia. Terima kasih. So I think the biggest problem that has hit us since March 2020, not only in Malaysia but I think all over the world, was the COVID-19 pandemic. I remember in 2019 when this first cases of the pandemic began in China, I was with a couple of friends, and they always think we know everything as doctors. And so somebody asked me, what do you think? And I said, well, it will be like the other coronavirus pandemics. It will cause a bit of problem, but everything should settle down within about 3 to 6 months. And how wrong have we been? Because it is now almost 1.5 years, and we are still very much stuck in the pandemic, and we are still looking for answers as to how we can overcome the effect of the pandemic without affecting the other realms of activity that we are all involved in. In Malaysia, and I think also all over the world, the recovery from the pandemic appears to be in spurts. We seem to be winning for a while, and then we seem to have problems again. And the emergence of variants of the coronavirus, which appear to be more aggressive, as well as vaccine hesitancy and a sluggish vaccination rollout all over the world, seem to be slowing down our recovery. I want to quickly move on to the area that we are concerned about, because what has happened all over the world, I don't think this is limited to Malaysia or to Indonesia, but this is a problem that all of us are grappling with, is that campus has been closed, and then there is closure or very limited access to teaching hospitals for clinical treatment, for clinical training. We have had disruptions in delivery of teaching learning activity, and we have also had to face disruptions in assessment. And I think these are the 4 areas that we have been trying to grapple with every day for the last 18 months or so. Very quickly, what do we need to do is that with the onset of the pandemic, we have realized that we need to innovate. And the first thing that I think all of us have done is to convert our face-to-face sessions to online delivery. I think I think I may be right if I said that as doctors, we probably have been the slowest among other education and professions in taking on online delivery in a big way before the onset of the pandemic. We were very comfortable with the traditional methods of delivery, which were basically face-to-face. And a lot of our sessions, especially as students moved on into clinical years, required face-to-face bedside teaching. And so the movement prior to the pandemic was rather slow. However, since the pandemic, I think we have all learned many lessons, and we have begun to move towards online delivery. And predominantly, that has been 2 things. One is we have started to use platforms such as the one we are using now, where we can deliver synchronous sessions with a live audience. And then we can also record and produce podcasts of various sessions, which can then be accessed asynchronously by students. This is important for 2 reasons. One is that students are able to access teaching learning sessions once the session is over. And number 2, in schools that have an international student body, the difference in time zones sometimes requires us to be asynchronous in our delivery. But by and large, the other big problem, or the elephant in the room, has been how to conduct bedside sessions. And we have, I think, to begin bedside sessions, the first thing that we have done is to begin with simulation. When we talk about simulation, I think the problem is that in our part of the world, both Malaysia and in Indonesia, access to patients in hospital has never been a problem prior to the pandemic. And so simulation was never a primary method of delivering clinical skills. It was always accessory or an adjunct method, or a method that we use to bolster our face-to-face sessions. But moving forward, I think things are going to change, and we will have to depend more and more on simulations, either with the use of mannequins or with standardized simulated patients, so that students are able to develop their clinical skills. The problems when we want to deliver teaching online is that online conversion requires strong IT platforms. Prior to the pandemic, all universities had learning management systems, but we were on different levels of the slope. And we found that when we wanted to convert some of our platforms, and that was true of MAHSA when we started in March last year, the platform that we had could not take the number of students and staff that were logging in at any point in time. So the university had to very quickly upgrade the IT platform and the servers so that it could accommodate a larger number of students and teachers at the same time. We found out that meeting spaces were not necessarily safe. And I think that was a learning lesson for some of us who are older, not necessarily for some of our students who I think are much more savvy about these things than us. But we found that we needed to have secure meeting spaces so that our meetings couldn't be hacked into, and we could avoid undesirable situations from arising during classes. In every faculty, we have faculty members who are very conversant with the use of IT, and who are very comfortable with the use of a computer, and those who are less comfortable. So faculty development needed to begin. We had to begin to train faculty so that everybody reached a minimum level of competence and would be able to conduct their classes at least using meeting spaces and IT platforms such as this. I remember in March 16th or 17th, when we had our first total lockdown, I had to learn what Zoom was from my wife. I didn't know that there was a platform such as Zoom, and I didn't know that there was a platform where we could actually conduct meetings online. And I had to learn how to use it almost overnight so that I could begin to teach as well as meet my faculty. Finally, there is the whole issue of student acceptance. Because while we were moving, the students also had to move. And students, some of them were not on campus. Some of them could not return to campus. We needed to assure them that teaching and learning would continue, and that the university and the faculty would have the necessary hardware as well as ability to deliver uninterrupted teaching during the period of the lockdown. So the immediate response that we took was to use what was available at that point in time. All medical schools all medical schools and all universities had a learning management system, and we had to operationalize and make the learning management system more efficient very, very quickly. And the easiest way to begin was to use the available teaching resources and to convert them to online delivery with voiceovers. And we were able to do that very quickly. In fact, I think over a period of about 3 to 5 days, we managed to convert whatever teaching resources that were available, suitable for some form of online delivery, largely with voiceovers. We had to invest in meeting spaces, and I think Google Meet and Microsoft Teams in the early days provided meeting places that were free. And then we had to train our staff to use these meeting spaces so that we could begin classes as quickly as possible. And I'm glad to say that all members in the faculty met that challenge very, very quickly, and we were ready to begin almost the next morning after the lockdown was put into place in Malaysia. As we went along, we found that just doing voiceovers would not be enough. And I think all of us realized that the material that we could actually deliver well face-to-face was not necessarily the kind of material that was amenable to online delivery. So we had to change the online teaching and learning activity, which would allow more interaction with students online. So the use of more audio-visual material to modify the available slides and material so that they would be more acceptable to students on an online platform was needed. Faculty development, like I said, was required, and we needed to bring people onto a common platform that they could use. We had to invest in one space that was acceptable for all students. And we had to also take into account what the regulatory bodies required of us. Because just like I'm sure the situation is in Indonesia, the medical programs are regulated by the medical councils of our countries, and they have specific undergraduate standards that we all need to meet. And with the onset of the pandemic, the Malaysian Medical Council came up with a series of guidance notes that we had to adhere to ensure that our curriculum delivery was in accordance to their requirements. And we mandated that all sessions be recorded so that students would be able to access this asynchronously. This has two effects. One is it allows students to access material. It allows staff to review the material that they have delivered so that they can improve it as we went along. And number three, it also is very important as a repository of information for further use, as well as for accreditation purposes when the regulatory bodies come to see what we are doing in our faculty and what we have done in the faculty during the pandemic. Clinical teaching was where we had the major challenge, because just like in many other countries, our teaching hospitals were close to students, and the case mix in the teaching hospitals also changed tremendously, and many of the teaching hospitals were actually just servicing patients with COVID. So we had to begin to produce videos. We could get initially videos from YouTube, but at a second stage, what we required was that we needed to produce videos that were from our university and that were using local subjects so that it is more comfortable and it is more acceptable by our students. We had to think about case-based discussion. And what we did was we mandated all our clinical staff to look at the 10 to 15 most common conditions that they felt that an undergraduate medical student should be proficient with, and to prepare case-based discussions for all these sessions so that we can take them through these conditions online and discuss and deliberate on how we would manage these situations. So while we lost out on the face-to-face examination, we tried to compensate by creating case-based discussions that would cover the investigation and the management skills. Once hospitals, as hospitals remained closed, but once students were allowed back into campus in limited numbers, we began simulation sessions in our clinical skills lab. And that also required an investment in getting more mannequins for us to use for our students, and started to conduct clinical skill sessions within the campus. Once hospitals opened, then we had to plan a phased return of students to hospital with a priority that was based on need. And that always meant that the final year students were given the first bite of the apple and were allowed to go into hospital first, because these were the people that would be graduated immediately and who would join the workforce in the very near future. Assessments were another big issue, and assessments were postponed. Some assessments were cancelled and replaced with assignment-based activity, and some assessments were delayed. We had to move to online assessments, and we found that for low-stakes assessments, which were just part of continuous assessment of knowledge, conversion to an assignment-based platform or an assignment-based exam or a quiz-based exam with a simple pass-fail status took out a lot of pressure from the students as well as the teaching staff. This allowed the students to then concentrate on the high-stakes assessments, which actually needed grades and marks. And it also allowed the staff to concentrate on improving the teaching and learning and preparing for high-stakes assessment rather than having to assess students every few weeks using multiple assessment methods. The problem with high-stakes assessment was that it needed to be held according to the regulatory standards. And in Malaysia, the Malaysian Medical Council mandated that any change in our high-stake examinations should be approved by the Senate of our university. And so we had to do that very quickly and get all those exams approved. We also went one step further at MAHSA, and for our final exam, what we did was we actually engaged with the Malaysian Medical Council and presented our plan for the final professional exam and obtained an approval for from the Malaysian Medical Council that this examination would be appropriate for a graduating class. And I think that helped us a lot in increasing the confidence of both the academic staff, the university, as well as the students, that we were conducting an examination that met the requirements in terms of examination security, reliability, and validity. We had to deliberate between whether we wanted to do an open book exam or a closed book exam. We found that an open book exam, while being very ideal for deep learning, and I think one of the best examples comes from the Imperial College in London, where they actually did a closed book, open book exam for their final year medical students. And I think they had to do 2 papers of about 3 hours each. But to prepare for an open book exam, the learning curve for both staff and students was found to be rather steep. And so we found that we could not implement that immediately. And we decided that a closed book exam would be more easily achievable. And for those exams that we were conducting online, we created a system of real-time proctoring. So all the exams were loaded onto our learning management system. It was password protected. Students were online and staff were online. A password was given for students to begin the exam, and every staff was proctoring between 4 to 6 students real time throughout the examination. And we found that we could do this quite well by running a couple of mock sessions for the students as well as the staff, and get everybody comfortable with running the exam. We were concerned about internet failure, and what we did was we told all students to invest in a data plan with about 10 gigabytes. And I'm really, really happy to say that why in all the high-stake professional exams that we held, we did not have issues with internet because of this. So to summarize, the problems were problems with technology, ability to stream, to log in, to download and upload material, to ensure that there was good internet quality, and to ensure that there was security. And the second issue was a skill issue to ensure that both teachers and students had the necessary skills to engage in an online platform. Once that started, we found that the next major issue was in mentoring and support. And when we had face-to-face interaction, it was quite easy to gauge student well-being and what the students were doing, because we were meeting them every day in the wards, in the classes, or in the laboratories. But for the whole of last year, or the better part of the last academic year, we did not meet any students, and it was very difficult to gauge student well-being. We also did not know what we should do when we do an online class. Should we ask all students to have their cameras on? In the beginning, that was the accepted wisdom. But later, we found that that a lot of students did not want to have their cameras on because of various other reasons. Because they perhaps didn't want to actually share with their colleagues where they were staying. And we found that it is not absolutely necessary that cameras need to be on, and that forcing students to have the cameras on may have a negative effect rather than a positive effect. So this was a learning curve for all of us, and we had to make judgments based on situations. Consequent to the pandemic, there was a study which encompassed 129,123 medical students from 47 countries all over the world to look at how they were handling the pandemic. And they found that the prevalence of depression among medical students was 27%, and suicide ideation, more alarmingly, was at up to about 11% due to the effect of the pandemic. Students express a lot of anxiety and stress due to uncertainty about the future, due to issues of whether they would be able to graduate on time, due to concerns about whether they would be able to perform when they went out into the workplace. For us, I think another issue is what would be the impact on social skills and communication in the long term, because these students had not come into contact with their own course mates. They had not actually engaged in any real-time conversation with students, with patients. So whether there would be an impact or not. Another issue that concerns us, and I think we don't have the answer, is that a lot of preclinical medical students have been receiving their instruction online over the last 1.5 years. And we don't know how well the delivery has been and how it will translate into their clinical years when they require these basic sciences when they work with patients. But one of the most important things that we noticed in that situation was to open channels of communication. The university, I think, did a very good thing, and they mandated that staff and students, as well as the academic leadership of each faculty, open channels of communication with students and communicate with students on a regular basis. So we had online sessions where we spoke to students. We had online sessions to brief students on the situation as well as what would be happening. We wrote to them to tell them about changes, because changes occurred very quickly and we needed to get that across. And we also assured students that they could contact us so that we could address concerns as and when they began. And I think that paid off in a very big way for us, because students were quite clear on who they needed to contact. And I'm glad to say that in almost all situations, the faculty rose to the challenge and was available to students whenever they needed help. It's always important when we change delivery and assessment to look at what students think. And we have begun to look at feedback from the whole faculty. But being an obstetrician and gynecologist, we did a little study in our own department to look at what students thought about the obstetrics and gynecology rotation. And what we found that students felt that online teaching and learning was not acceptable as an adequate substitute. But many felt that there were better opportunities to achieve learning outcomes and also to learn at their own pace. They all felt that there was good interaction between them and the instructors during these sessions. And they all felt that the instructors were well prepared and were available, and instructions to prepare for these sessions were very, very clear, with very good responses from the teachers as well as the students. In terms of assessment, students did have misgivings about whether this was a good platform for summative assessment, but they all felt that it was a very good system for platform for formative assessment. And in the future, they felt that this method of instruction should be retained, and that for the clinical years, it would be an acceptable medium for teaching history taking, but not for examination and clinical reasoning. So we can take away a few lessons from this small study, in that we have to continue to use online teaching. It will be a good adjunct or a good, it will be a good accessory to our face-to-face delivery. It's really, really good because it allows students to learn at their own pace and to go back to material to reassure themselves that they have got it right. And it is an excellent platform for formative assessment. It's very important to adhere to the regulatory frameworks, and it is important to maintain good records of all teaching and learning activity. And for exams, it is very important to get external assessor feedback on all high-stakes assessment. Just like every university, for all major professional exams, we had external assessors, and we had them on site throughout the exam. Some of the external examiners were not able to come for the exam face-to-face because of restrictions. And in that situation, what we did was we actually had facilities to record the whole examination and allow the external examiner to access that real time online to watch how the assessment was going on. And they all provided feedback on how they felt that we had run the exam. And overall, the external assessor feedback on the examination was that we seem to have met the requirements for a valid and reliable exam. To ensure that this was the case, we also looked at performance of this cohort of students who had online learning and online assessment with previous years who had face-to-face learning and face-to-face assessment. And we found that there was not a very big variance in the number of students who passed the high-stakes assessment that we have in the faculty. So the lessons learned for us is that it is very important to engage with external examiners. It's very important to make sure that external examiners have access to all the examination material. And it is very important to constantly compare performance with previous years to make sure that we are not having a major change in results outcomes from one year to another. Finally, when we look at the quality, we needed to review the program so that we take relevant and current content for online delivery, which would ensure that the students that we train are competent and fit for purpose when they go to the workplace and meet the expectations of the student, the parents, and the hospitals and doctors with whom they are going to work with. In conclusion, I just feel that disruption is important. And I think disruption by COVID-19 is not necessarily a bad thing, because it has allowed us to move out from our comfort zone, and it has forced all of us to innovate. But while we innovate, it is important that innovation must be faced. We must ensure that the innovations that we introduce are acceptable to faculty as well as to students. And we must ensure that when we innovate, no one is left behind. We have to make sure that we use platforms that are accessible to everyone. And we shouldn't innovate for the sake of innovation, because in a study that was done in Germany a couple of years ago, this was before the pandemic, a lot of students expressed the opinion that innovation was being made because we had the instruments to innovate and not necessarily because it was required. And when we looked at innovation, students still said that a face-to-face encounter was by far the most important thing in their training. So we cannot lose sight of that fact. So while we innovate, we have to make sure that we don't sacrifice the tried and trusted methods of instruction and assessment. What we can take back is that online education is here to stay. It is not going to go away, and it is now going to be a part of our life, I think, in the future. For clinical training, simulation will begin to play a very important part. And I think this has already happened in the West and in more developed countries, where patients themselves may not be very, very keen for multiple students to examine them. We already faced that situation in Malaysia before the pandemic, where patients actually tell instructors and tell students that they don't want to be used for teaching because too many people have been disturbing them, and that they felt that their space and their ability or their pursuit to get well was being interfered with. So if that is going to happen, and I think that will happen more and more as we go along, and so we will have to think about how we will simulate. We may have to use standardized patients. We may have to engage stable patients from hospitals to take part in clinical training. We may have to speak to our hospitals as well as our patients and find out if we can record patient encounters to be used for clinical training. And finally, we will have to invest in mannequins so that students can practice examination and can practice procedures that are required for them to become competent interns and young medical officers. The question that we will have to grapple with, and I think that answer will come in the next few years, is what the impact of face-to-face, lack of face-to-face training has been on clinical performance. I think that we are resilient. If there is one thing I am confident about, is that we will survive. And I think all of us are resilient enough, and I think our students are also resilient enough. And while there may be some gaps in the short term, most of us and most of our students will recognize these gaps and will have the resilience to fill these gaps within a short period of time. We will have to build robust online assessment systems, and we may have to invest in assessment systems that are already available, or we will have to invest, or we will have to adapt systems that are useful for our own use. The most important thing is that we will have to remain agile, and we will have to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, which I think will be the order of the day for the next couple of months. If not, I hope that it is only till the end of the year, and that by 2022, we will be able to go back to some form of what it was like in the past or pre-COVID, you know. But I think if there is one thing that this pandemic has taught us, is that we need to be able to change very, very quickly. And we need to be agile, and we need to be able to think out of the box, so that we are able to deliver teaching, learning, and assessment without too much of unnecessary interference. That actually brings me to the end of my talk. And I really, while preparing for this, I looked at two papers which I think are really useful, and which I would recommend to everybody if you want to have a look at what is going on. Both these papers are free access papers, and I have provided the reference here. And I think it will do two things. Number one, it will convince you that you made many right decisions, because a lot of the things that people talk about in these two papers are things that I think all of us have done. Maybe we did it intuitively, but it will reassure us. Number two, it will tell us some of the other challenges that perhaps we may need to face as we go along, and will allow us to think about what we want to do as and when these challenges crop up. With that, I reach the end of my presentation. I thank all of you. I thank the faculty at MAHSA for this opportunity for me to talk to you. And as I said to the Dean just now, I think it's not necessarily a talk, but more of a conversation, because I think none of us have the right answers on how to deliver this effectively during the pandemic. I think all of us have stories to share, and I think it will be useful for us to take it as a sharing of ideas rather than a lecture. Because I certainly, if there is one thing that this 1.5 years has taught me, is that I don't have all the answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think your sharing is very insightful for us. I really looking at detail and very detailed information assessment, what you applied during the pandemic now to your medical student. Now I invite maybe lecturers or student, if you want to share your experience or how you feel about learning during this pandemic, you can raise hand directly, you can ask and share, or maybe you can put it in a chat box. Okay, maybe while waiting, Prof, I'm also a lecturer in UIN, and I feel being as a lecturer also got me stressed during this pandemic, because I think not just the student feeling a Zoom fatigue. This is a condition which is happened not just for me as a lecturer, but I think more to the student. But then I think you give us many strategies on how we can handle this, and also you give us a very, I think I heard about one cohort, how you assess whether the outcome is still the same between the full online and the previous year. Maybe if we want to apply how we assess our successful in this that we apply in our faculty? What a very easy step to start the assessment, to know that we are success in teaching in this pandemic.
Okay, I think I don't profess to be an expert in this area. Let me first of all say that. Okay, I always feel that medical education, just like anything else in medicine, it's an ever evolving area, and what is necessarily true today may not be true tomorrow. But I think what we did was we looked at a few things. The first thing is we looked at the regulatory frameworks, and we looked at what the medical council wanted of us. And we looked at all our course learning outcomes and ensured that even if we needed to change some modes of assessment, the course learning outcomes that we would need to test were tested. So I think those are basic things: creating an assessment blueprint that ensures that course learning outcomes were met. We had problems, we had resistance, because clinicians are always a peculiar sort of people. I'm a clinician as well, and we all clinicians sometimes think we know everything, and that we shouldn't be questioned. And that, I think, is part of the doctor's psyche. I don't know. I think it creates a sense of confidence, because we have to go out every day and we have to make decisions, and we have to make decisions very quickly. And I think that we build in a certain defense mechanism. But when we are faced with a pandemic, we have to change. We have to change. And we have to get everybody on board so that they are able to move as one unit. So it's important to get those things right. Course learning outcomes, blueprints, what assessment modes you're going to change. Make sure that you meet the regulatory framework. And then what we did, we used to do it in the past, but we made sure that we did it during the pandemic. Our questions, we sent it out to the external examiners. All the examination questions, together with the model answers that we had prepared, were then sent out to all the external examiners, and all the external examiners were asked to give comments to see whether we had met the course learning outcomes, whether it fitted the blueprint, and so on. So based on that feedback, we as a team sat again and looked at the paper and made some changes. Not all things were changed, but we felt that some of those changes that were suggested may be justified. Some of them said that some pictures for our OSCE stations needed to be changed because they were not clear. So we did that. We did all that. And then we had the external examiners completely involved in the exam. And we finally looked at how they did in relation to each cohort. How this cohort did in relation to the next. So I think we have answered part of the question. Yes, we have had a reliable and valid exam. It looks like the success rates in the exam are almost similar to the previous cohorts. But now we have the second test, especially for those who have finished their final years and have moved out to become housemen. And our final year cohort that qualified in October will be beginning their housemanship shortly, I think by the end of this month. How they perform as housemen will then be the final proof of whether we have achieved what we plan to do. If they have done as well as our previous cohorts, then I think we can be reasonably confident that some of the things that we did are right, and that if the pandemic continues, we can continue to improve and move along this track. But if we find that, in 6 months, we are getting reports that are perhaps not so favorable, then we will have to go back and engage with our stakeholders to see what we can do to improve outcomes. So I think those are the principles that we abided by in the faculty. And I also want to thank you for bringing up the issue of stress for the lecturers. I think that's something that, we all don't think too much about, and I think a lot of us have been more stressed by working at home rather than working in office, because, we even sometimes think whether it's fair to have a cup of coffee and take 10 minutes off the computer, and a lot of us work much longer than our normal working times when we are online. And that has created enormous stress. And I think that is something that is worth looking at, and perhaps even MAHSA and Makassar can do something together to see whether what are the stress levels among lecturers during the pandemic, and really see whether we can do something to relieve that. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, I think I interest to also making some cohort, because I think by the end of this year, our student will go into national exam as well. So maybe
Yes.
for the next year, we can go into a cohort and we can compare between the data. Thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Now
Thank you.
we have some question from, this is from the student. I give screen to Alfiani. You can give your question, Alfiani.
Okay, first, does my voice sound clear? Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for the opportunity to ask questions that have been given to me from Dr. Dila. First, my name is Alfiani Chandra, and I'm a sophomore from Faculty of Medicine at Islamic University of Alauddin, Makassar. And after hearing about Prof Ganesh's presentation before, I really appreciate it, and it is very interesting material, and it is important to discuss it because as a medical student who has been taking online classes for maybe a year and a half, I feel there are some unresolved obstacles in this adaptation process, such as time management and self-motivations, because maybe some instructor or lecturer not aware about this. So they think because this is just an online class that can be held anywhere and anytime, so many schedules are scheduled to other times, such as weekends, outside the schedule that should be, and sometimes it happens suddenly, so students find it difficult to have their own time to review material or even just some time for themselves. And I think it's kind of stressful for the student. So maybe what would you recommend as solution in this case? And what can I do as a student? And I have another question is about whether this online learning like this will become new educational trend that are permanent or just a form of temporary solution to this pandemic conditions. Maybe that's all my question based on my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think there are two questions. One is, what do you think about organizing teaching sessions suddenly and sometimes on weekends and at times outside the normal working hours, and the stresses that it causes for students? And number two, whether you think online education will become part of will become part of our mode of instruction as we go along. I think I'll answer the second part first, because I think I'm very convinced about the second part. I think it's here to stay. I think it is here to stay. And I think one thing that we have all realized in the last 1.5 years is that some of our teaching can be delivered very efficiently online. And actually people have been doing it for years, but we have been in a rather comfortable zone in that we have had no pressure to change. I think all of us have heard about that organization called Osmosis, a group of doctors in the United States who actually began, these are doctors, and then they are also people with IT skills. And they actually began to prepare instructional material on various common conditions, and some of it is available free online. Some of it you have to buy and subscribe to. Well, one of the things that happened to me during the pandemic was that I began to look at all these material, and I found that some of this material was much better than anything that I could do on my own, and it was free. And so what I did was, when I taught polycystic ovarian syndrome to my students, I then said, guys, look, either before my class or after, go to this YouTube. It's available free. This is the URL. Please go and look at this YouTube on polycystic ovarian syndrome. Because if you don't remember anything that I taught you, at least remember everything on the video, because it gives you all the must-know information. Okay? And I think that's very important, you know, and that is very important when you deliver things online. You have to really give students the information that they need in a bite-sized package, something that they can immediately use. And our students are so used to that. This generation of students want information that they can use now, just like Toyota, you know. They only bring in the materials that they need to assemble the car at that point. They don't keep anything extra. And that's how Toyota really, you know, in the past began to become a big leader in motor car manufacturing, because they had that just-in-time technique. And I think that is one thing that we can take on now in medical education, to be just in time. What does my student need now, and how am I going to deliver it quickly and efficiently? So it will be here, and I think it will be very good, because once you have put something online, it is there for the student to go back and review. It is there for you to review as an instructor and to change. And I did that. I found that a lot of the material that I had before the pandemic was actually useless over the last 1.5 years, because students just didn't find it interesting anymore. So I had to redo some of it so that it was more interactive and more useful. And I found that students responded positively to that. Now, as far as working out of hours, in this situation, I don't think we have any choice. And I think I will put that purely and simply. And this is what I have told my students as well. We are in an emergency situation. This is a situation that none of us have faced. And so some demands are going to be made of our time, and some demands will be made outside teaching hours. And clinical skills can only be taught properly if you have access to patients. Everything else will be just an adjunct, or will just help support your knowledge. But there is nothing like actually putting your hand on a patient and examining them. There's nothing like taking a stethoscope and putting it on the chest of a real patient and listening to a heart sound or listening to the lung sounds. You have to do it, you know. And if that means you have to work outside normal working hours, and if you have to go outside normal working hours, you have to you have to do that in this stage. It may not be long term. It may not be long term, but it will be there for the next couple of months. And finally, though I don't want to sound unkind, but you know, I've said this to my students as well, so I think it should be okay. We have chosen to become doctors. This is the profession that we have chosen, right? And this profession means we have to be prepared to work outside normal working hours. We have to be ready to go out at times when it is not very comfortable, you know. I'm sure, you know, there are days when all your teachers, your professors have gone out during Hari Raya, because there is an ill patient in the hospital that needs to be managed. We can't say that today is Hari Raya, I'm not going out. I have gone out on a Deepavali day to do an emergency hysterectomy for a patient with postpartum hemorrhage. I can't say that today is, you know, Deepavali, it's very important for me, I can't go out today. I still have to go. I have to go and do that because that's my job, you know. So that is part of the game as well, okay? But what is important is, in whatever time that you have, find areas or find some time that you can actually put aside to do your own thing. You have to do that. You have to prioritize. There is a little video on YouTube about medical students, and they, I think this video came out of America, and they actually talk about, you have to decide what you need to do. You have to have a bath, you have to exercise, you have to eat, you have to go shopping, but you don't need to necessarily have a boyfriend or girlfriend while you're in medical school. It's not necessary, right? It's not necessary. So this can immediately go out of the equation. And you have to concentrate on the 4 other things that you really need to do. So like shopping, is it necessary for me to go shopping every day, or can I have a group of friends who will go on my behalf? So today I do the shopping for 3 people. Tomorrow that other person will do the shopping for me. So that will save me some time as well. But bathing and eating, you have to do. You can't do anything. So you have to find time in a day to do it. And find time in a day to do something that is out of medicine. If it is reading, if it is watching a movie, if it is going for a walk, exercising, whatever it is, find some time to do that. That's when you are not going to be engaged. But working out of hours and going out to the clinics and the hospitals, if it is out of hours, is something that you can't. I don't think you can prevent it. It's going to be there. It's going to happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Nice tips for the students. And maybe I go to the chat box. This is from Muhammad Fitra, Prof. The question is about the clinical skill laboratory, which now in UIN we have it offlinely. But before they attend the clinical lab skill, then the students should go into a PCR test for the COVID-19, and
yes.
The student Fitra asking about whether this kind of method, having a clinical skill offlinely, will be the risks or not, between the benefit and the risks. Do you have an opinion or suggestion for us?
Okay, I think we are doing almost the same thing in MAHSA. Students who go to hospital must have a PCR test. I think the PCR test is done 48 or 72 hours before they actually go to hospital. And that PCR test must be negative before they are allowed to hospital. And every day when they go to hospital, they have to get their temperature checked and blah, blah, and, fill in a little questionnaire about whether they have any symptoms and things like that. This is required by the hospital. And I think these are measures that are put into place to make sure that we are as safe as possible. For the campus, we haven't introduced a compulsory PCR as yet, but every student, I'm sure that some of you may have heard that in Malaysia, we have an application called MySejahtera, and that is run by the government. And you can update your status on MySejahtera every day to say whether you have been in contact and things like that. So we expect all our students to maintain their MySejahtera status, and every student, as soon as they enter campus, has a questionnaire to fill, and then they will have their temperature screen, and then they have to capture the places that they have been on a QR code, and there is a limit as to the number of people who can use a clinical skills lab at any one time. So we have to break the students down into smaller groups and just allow them to take part in some clinical skill activity, and then vacate that space, do a quick cleanup, and allow another group of students to come in. So I don't think you can actually avoid that. And I think it's very, for me, I think it's very good that the clinical skills labs are open, and that you are allowed to use it offline. And if that means putting in a few steps to ensure the safety of everyone, I think that is a sacrifice that all of us have to make. It's for the betterment of the community. So I think that's a good thing. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Prof. So maybe for the student, I hope you are satisfied with the answer. And then maybe this is for the last question. Also from the student, Mutmainah, you can open your mic now.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry for the other noise. It is an honor to have you, sir, here in this meeting. So my name is Mutmainah. I'm a second-year medical student. So based on my experience that I already experienced the online way and the offline way to learn the skill, the medical skill offline. So I always listen or hear the from the student side. So I would like to ask, I would like to hear from the lecturer side, which is maybe you may give us what is it there are is there any difficulties as a lecturer as a lecturer uh, doing this online and offline method. So I think that's all from my questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. If you look at my face, then I think you will have an idea of the answer. Can you see all the white hair? So the white hair tells you that I was trained as a doctor at a time when we didn't have this sort of issue at all. Everything was with real patients. I can remember making a mess of the first time I had to do a venipuncture in fourth year or fifth year. Prof Rosley, I'm very honored to say that Prof Rosley was one of my lecturers when I was a student in USM. He was my lecturer in community medicine. And he knows that the philosophy of USM at that time was that, we wanted students to be as hands-on as possible, and we were trained at a time when people used to say, you see one, you assist one, and then you do one. So we learned a lot based on mistakes, and we made the mistakes actually on real patients. And I think looking back, I now realize that that is not the best thing to do. And I'm sure you agree as well. So I think the fact that you have mannequins and the fact that you have simulated patients to practice on actually gives you an avenue where there is no threat to anybody. You can make as many mistakes as you want there because nothing is going to happen. When you learn how to put an IV line or take some blood on a mannequin, even if you don't get it right the first time, nothing is going to go wrong because it's not a real patient. But when it's a real patient and you don't get the line in, it's terrible. It's terrible for you. Your confidence takes a knocking, believe me. And you imagine the impact that it has on the patient as well. And the patient will tell the next patient, doktor ini dia tak tahu ambil darah lah. Lebih baik you masa dia datang ambil darah, lebih baik you pergi dari katil. Then this sort of thing. So you see, as a person who is trained with real patients, you as a teacher have to make that change as well. You have to now adapt to the fact that you're going to have to teach using a mannequin. But I think starting with the mannequin is a very good thing because it allows you to learn the basics without any threat to yourself and any threat to the patient. And once you are happy with your skills and then you go on to the hospital, you will be much more confident when you have to perform an examination or to perform a little procedure with a real patient. So I think the mannequin is important, okay? For all of us, we have to make that change. We have to change the way we think. And that takes time. That takes time because we always, say, oh, it's nothing like a real patient. But it's not that the real patient will never be there. You will have real patients, don't worry. But you are given that extra privilege, even call it a blessing, that you can actually practice on in a situation where there is no problem, where it is extremely safe for you. So use the mannequins as much as possible and prepare yourself with the necessary skills so that you, when you go to the hospital and you actually do it with real patients, you make as few mistakes as possible. Mistakes will be made, don't worry. Okay, right? And I used to have a lecturer who said that if you have a very low, if you say that you have never had complications, oh, I've never had complications when I did a hysterectomy. He used to tell us, you haven't done enough hysterectomies. You know, if you have done more procedures and you do more difficult cases, there will be complications. So there will be mistakes, and you learn from every mistake. Okay, and if possible, learn from the mistakes of your friends as well, so that you don't make the same mistake as your friend did. Okay, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's gonna be the last question for our session today. I believe that by this lecture, we learned a lot. We share a fruitful discussion. And of course, I believe that either the students, the lecturer in UIN Alauddin, this will bring a new idea for both of us in how we handle this pandemic, how we innovate more, particularly how we teach and how we learn in medical during this pandemic. Thank you again for your sharing. Maybe I give it back to the MC for the photo session.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Dila. And that was a public lecture and extraordinary discussion that we have done together. Hopefully in the future we can implement in life, especially because we know that the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, but education to the maximum has also continue. And then acara selanjutnya kita akan menampilkan video profil dari program studi pendidikan dokter Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar. Selamat menyaksikan.
Apparently there's sedikit masalah, Prof, dengan videonya. Mungkin ya, mohon maaf. Jaringan this internet. institutions located in the complex of our campus, of our laboratory. We are still 5 years old, Professor. There are some of our students.
Dan itulah tadi video profil Pendidikan Dokter Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar. Dan acara selanjutnya ialah penyerahan sertifikat kepada pembicara kita pada hari ini, yaitu Profesor Dr. Ganesh Ramachandran. Dan kepada operator kami persilahkan untuk share screen. Dan kami akan mengambil gambar dengan Prof mungkin. And the next event is the symbolic handover of certificate award to Associate Professor Dr. Ganesh Ramachandran. And we will take a picture. We will take a picture, some picture, Prof.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
Yes. Acara selanjutnya ialah sesi dokumentasi dengan seluruh peserta yang hadir. Kami persilahkan untuk seluruh peserta mungkin bisa mengaktifkan kameranya, karena kita akan melakukan sesi dokumentasi pada kegiatan kuliah umum pagi hari ini. And the next event is a documentation session. We are going to take a picture, and for all participants, hope you to on cam. Okay, we are going to take a picture and I will count it. 1, 2, and 3. Give smile. Okay, going to page 2. We are take a picture and 1, 2, and 3. Going to slide 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, thank you very much for all participants. Dan sampailah kita pada penghujung acara kuliah umum pada pagi hari ini. Marilah kita bersama-sama mengucapkan hamdalah, alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Henry Ford once said, anyone who stop learning is old, whether at 20 or 18. Anyone who keeps learning stay young. The greatest thing in life is to keep our mind young. So it is important for all of us to never stop learning. For verily, everything we see, we hear, and we feel is an education. Semoga seluruh ilmu yang kita peroleh hari ini dapat bermanfaat. Mungkin ini saja yang dapat kami sampaikan. Terima kasih banyak atas seluruh partisipan yang hadir. Kami ucapkan banyak-banyak terima kasih kepada Associate Prof Dokter Ganesh Ramachandran yang telah menyempatkan waktunya dan berbagi ilmu dan pengalaman kepada kami semua. Dan kami ucapkan banyak terima kasih kepada para tamu undangan yang hadir dan para jajaran dosen Pendidikan Dokter Universitas Islam Negeri Alauddin Makassar maupun mahasiswa juga yang menghadiri kegiatan ini. Mungkin ini saja yang dapat kami sampaikan. Terima kasih banyak dan sampai bertemu pada kuliah umum selanjutnya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Prof Ganesh. Thank you, Prof Rusli, for attending.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much,
everyone.
Very much.
Nanti mungkin Dokter Ayu kan dapat melanjutkan pembicaraan. Mungkin Prof Rusli, mungkin siapa tahu nanti ke depannya akan ada lagi kuliah ataupun semacam ini untuk mahasiswa dan dosen kami, Prof, kalau memungkinkan sebagai tindak lanjut MAHSA kerjasama dengan MAHSA, Prof. Mohon bantuannya, Prof.
Insyaallah. Insyaallah.
Terima kasih, Prof. Iya, iya. Saya kira terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih.
Iya.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Prof.